Welcome in, and what a night of boxing Saturday night as we see David Benavidez elevate into really now a boxing superstar. I think this was his coming out party. Benavidez has been a star. Saturday night elevated him to superstardom. Welcome into the Never Dropped podcast. This episode, I'm going to be breaking down, talking about, recapping the mega fight, the super fight that was David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, in which, if you haven't heard by now, was a unanimous decision win by Benavidez. Man, was it a great night for boxing. I just got to say that. It was great to see two of the best in the 168 division actually fight each other. For now, a chance to see an absolute war. If this fight is made between Canelo and David Benavidez, talk about a war that would be happening. But that's far ahead. We'll see if that fight happens. We're here to talk about what happened Saturday night. Man, it wasn't pretty at times. It was a little controversial, some might say, with the officiating, the refereeing by Kenny Bayless. We'll talk about all of this, right? First, I just got to give my props to David Benavidez. I thought he was going to go in the later rounds, finish off Plant. Certainly did a couple times look like that was going to be the case. Kenny Bayless stepped in, the ref. We may never know. But honestly, I had told you in my preview that I'd switched my pick so many times since this fight had been announced. And truthfully, coming into Saturday, I was close to changing my pick to Plant. It was a 50-50 fight, I thought, and I was almost leaning Plant going into the fight, but I stayed with Benavidez, and Benavidez did win. But that just goes to show you, man, it's great to see boxing having these fights where, people are so divided who's going to win, and even going into the day of the fight, you might switch up your pick. So we're going to talk everything, the main event. Also, I'll touch on the undercards because overall it was a great night of boxing. There's four fights total on the card. All of them were good fights. There's a controversial decision. That's the main undercard I want to talk about. Talk about that for a second, but don't worry, we're going to talk about this Benavidez Plant fight the majority of the time. If you're new to the Never Drop podcast, I'd ask you if you're listening to on the streaming services, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anything. I'd appreciate if you gave me a follow. Just keep you up to date with all the new episodes I drop. We're in full motion with this boxing schedule, so I'm cranking out episodes as soon as I can for all these fights coming up, all the news coming up. And then if you're listening on YouTube, I'd appreciate if you subscribed on YouTube. Like the video, subscribe, comment, tell me what you think. YouTube, there's more content coming soon, I promise you that. There's some video content. I know right now it's just audio. There's some video content coming up from trip to Vegas in about a month to see Tank versus Ryan Garcia. That's the second super fight we got coming up in the next, in a month span. That's a little way away. Let's talk about what happened Saturday night with this Benavidez and Plant card. All right, so first let's run through the undercard real quick. There's 3 fights on the undercard. Each of them were really good fights. Again, a great night of boxing. The first undercard was Cody Crowley defeating Abel Ramos with a majority decision. One judge had it tied 114-114. Then the 2 other judges had Crowley winning 115-113 and then 116-112. Overall, really good fight. Crowley won that fight, I believe. I was kind of surprised to see it was a majority decision, not a unanimous decision. I thought he kind of won that comfortably. Excuse me. But overall, a really good fight. And if you would listen to the Crowley story, Cody Crowley story, you were probably rooting for the guy. Battling depression. His father had battled depression. Sadly, had taken his own life, his father. This was his first fight since his father's passing. After the fight, you had Jim Gray talking to him, and he was getting emotional. Jim Gray was getting emotional. It seemed like everyone was getting emotional. If you were listening, you were probably also getting emotional. So it was great to see him win, especially everything he's coming off. And just hearing his story, happy for him. That was the first undercard. The second one is the one I want to talk about. Chris Colbert defeating Jose Valenzuela via unanimous decision. All three judges had it 95 to 94 in favor of Colbert. Remember, this was a 10-round fight. Colbert went down in the first 25 seconds of the first round, and then there were multiple rounds where Valenzuela just was teeing off on him. Was absolutely having Colbert on the ropes and was teeing off on him. So if you're kind of hearing what I'm implying, yes, I did think Valenzuela won this fight. I thought he edged out Colbert because, again, that first round, I thought he won by 3 points because I had him winning 2 more rounds, and then obviously tacking on the point for downing Colbert in the first round. I thought he won by 3 points, right? If Chris Colbert's name rings a bell, it's probably because I talked about him a little bit, because if you remember when Gervonta Davis fought Hector Luis Garcia in January, and when I did the preview, that was really Hector Luis Garcia's biggest win. That was his win that catapulted him, because Colbert's been a hyped prospect for a while now, and that was a shocking defeat he suffered against Hector Luis Garcia, and this was his first fight since that fight, right? He was coming off the loss, and if you watched the Valenzuela-Colbert fight, the commentators talked about, because Valenzuela also came off a surprising loss and was a hyped prospect. This was a must win for both of these fighters, right? Because if you lose this, you lose back-to-back, you might have to go all the way back to the drawing board and get back in line for, to get back to the position that you're at now and that you were projected to be at. So watching this fight, I thought Valenzuela had it. I thought he had it. It looked like he was dominating. Granted, Colbert had some good rounds. After he got dropped, I was like, okay, this will be close. Not close. This fight will end before the 10th round. I didn't think it was going to be close. I was like, okay, Colbert, he's about done for this fight. Let's get on to the third fight. Colbert had great offensive rounds. I really think they were going, Valenzuela would have a great round, then Colbert would come back and you have a great round. Personally, I just thought Valenzuela had won too many of those, great rounds, and he was going to win that fight. But the judges said otherwise. A lot of people are on his side. Jim Gray in the in the ring after the fight, post-fight interview, Valenzuela is like, "What? How did I lose this?" He turns to Jim Gray. He's like, "What did you think?" Jim Gray asks him a couple more questions. Then he does the mic drop of all mic drops. He goes, "You asked me a question. I think it was a terrible decision." So the entire stadium was on Valenzuela's side. Jim Gray was the announcers. I don't know. Congrats to Chris Colbert for winning that fight. Helps him in his career. I believe he said in his post-fight interview he's going back to 130. This fight was at 135. Frank Martin, you remember me covering him, Earl Spence stablemate, who the fighter Earl Spence is promoting, who dominated against Rivera back in December. He was on Twitter talking, and they asked him about Colbert about Martin, because they've had some back and forth. Colbert's like, he's got to come down to 130 to see me, so I don't expect to see that fight anytime soon. And I would have Frank Martin in that one. But congrats to Chris Colbert, and I hope Valenzuela doesn't have to go back to the drawing board after this fight, because he put up a real heck of a fight, and a majority of people think he won. Unfortunately, 3 of those people that think he lost were judges in this fight. So that was the second undercard. That was kind of, hey, it puts you on notice, like, okay, anything can maybe happen tonight. And then the final undercard, the co-main, Jesus Ramos defeated Joey Spencer, TKO, 7th round. Really a one-sided fight. Ramos put down Spencer in the first round, and Spencer couldn't get his right hand going. He couldn't get anything going. When he did throw 2 power punches, I kid you not, Ramos walked right through him like nothing hit him. Spencer threw him, and I was like, oh, and Ramos just walked towards him, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this fight isn't going that much longer. This fight's done. And then eventually, Spencer's corner smartly threw in the towel and ended the fight in the 7th round. So that was a good co-main. Again, all undercards were good. Great night for boxing. I believe that was a 154 fight. So, there's some interesting matchups at 154 if that's the route he continues to go. But that's just the undercard. I want to touch on it quickly because it would be a disservice not to talk about all the fights that we had on Saturday. But why you're here, why you watched, why you bought the card, and the main reason was for the main event. And let's get right into that. All right, main event time. What we all were here for, what we all were watching for. As I mentioned in my intro, this, I believe, turned David Benavidez into a boxing superstar, someone who's going to stay here for a while. We got to remember this. He's only 26 years old, right? He has so much in front of him. He's going to be around in the sport a long time, dominant in the sport a long time. Getting to the fight in particular, this was kind of, I don't want to say tale of two fights, but it kind of was, right? Plant did what he needed to in those first 5 rounds, and then 6-12, I had Benavidez dominating every round. I gave every round to him. I think most of the judges did the same. In those first 5 rounds, I had Plant 4-1. So overall, I had it 8-4 in Benavidez's favor. But that makes it seem closer than it was. Those final 7 rounds, Benavidez was just teeing off on Plant. Right. So let's go back to the first, 5 rounds. Let's talk about this fight. So the reason that I had Plant like that, he was doing what we thought he was going to do. Right. I talked about, if he outboxes David, he can get away with a decision. I know we had him knock out Durrell and that be KO of the year. And everyone's like, okay, maybe he has that power. Well, of course, yeah, he does have some power. It did not show against Benavidez, and Benavidez wasn't really afraid of his power. So those first 5 rounds, Plant was getting in, clinching, which was a huge topic of discussion. He was getting in, holding, and getting out, using that 22x22 ring, which I had mentioned was going to be a factor, right? He was just moving, and you were thinking, all right, if he doesn't get fatigued and continues the strategy for the entire fight, he's going to walk away with the decision, and it's going to be kind of a boring decision because David was timid those first 4 to 5 rounds. He really wasn't letting his hands go, and if he was looking for that one shot. It looked like he was angry. It looked like he was angry at Plant, and he was just trying to hit him as hard as he could. And it really looked like Plant had him flustered, and after that 4th round finished, I was like, oh, I think, Plant might have figured something out with Benavidez can't figure out Plant, and he's angry, so it's kind of messing him up while fighting. It has his mind like, oh, I want to kill this dude, but he can't get the skill. He doesn't have the skills right now to do it because he's just so angry. But come that 6th round, Benavidez, wasn't scared of that power. Started walking down Plant. Just walking him down. You know what? Punch me. Go ahead, punch me. I talked about Plant having only Benavidez, only having half an inch on the reach. There was no big reach factor in this fight. So Benavidez started throwing the jabs a little more. Then he started throwing the left hooks, the left hand. Those seemed to catch Plant every which way. Those continued to hit Plant. He was having a tough time with those. Benavidez wasn't going to the body as much as I thought, but he did. I forget. It was either the 4th or 5th round, and he mentioned this in his post-fight press conference. He said he knew the tide had changed, tide had turned when he hit Plant with a body shot, and Plant was like, "Oh, Plant, it hurt him," right? And I want to say that was the 4th round because that was it. Because Plant was kind of on the ropes, and he kind of doubled over for a second because that really hurt him. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this fight's going to go in David's way. All right, here are some of the numbers overall for the fight. Benavidez won by unanimous decision. One judge had a 117 to 111. Another had 116 to 112. That's the score I had. And then one judge had it 115 to 113. I thought that one was a little close. I thought 4 rounds was kind of the max you could give to Plant, and that judge gave him 5. But either way, the judge did get it right. He won. David Benavidez did. The punches wise, so Benavidez landed 30 jabs, excuse me. That's about 23% of the jabs he threw that connected. He threw and connected on 180 power punches, totaling to 210 total punches. Excuse me, I'm messing up my words. So 210 power. Oh my goodness. 210 total punches, 180 power shots, 30 jabs. That was Benavidez. Plant, 23 jabs, which was only 9% of his total connected jabs, which early in those rounds, that's what he was doing. He was jabbing. The early rounds, just like any fight, they were kind of feel you out rounds, jabbing. Okay. To think Plant only landed 23 jabs, it seemed like he was throwing jab after jab after jab. He did throw some nice combos. I will say that. In those first 5 rounds, he was throwing some nice combinations. I was like, wow, I was expecting Benavidez to be the one throwing these 4 punch combinations, and it's Plant. Right? He'd jab, get Benavidez to shell up, and then throw a couple combinations. That was early in the fight. Power shots for Plant, 68 power shots, so only 18% of his power shots connected, totaling to only 91 punches. So that tells you almost all you need to know. Benavidez landed 210 total punches to Plant's 91 total punches. When David got going in that second half, just like, oh, okay, you're gonna throw some jabs, you're gonna throw power shots, I'm gonna throw them right back at you. I'm not scared of your power. You're fatiguing, which I had mentioned. We had seen Caleb Plant get fatigued in that Canelo lost. Looked like all that running had him fatigued in that second half of the fight. He was holding on for dear life in those clinches. And Kenny Bayless was allowing him. This is the other aspect of the fight. So if you're paying attention on Twitter, or heck, even the commentators were ripping into Kenny Bayless for the holds in the fight. That was all Caleb Plant's tactics, I believe, right? He just wanted to hold. He wanted to, anytime he thought Benavidez posed a threat, got a couple punches off, he was grabbing and holding. So Benavidez couldn't do it. It was going to be an ugly style to try and get the win, but you got to do what you got to do to get the W. It was going to be ugly. At a point, the fans started booing, but Plant, that was what he was trying to do. He was trying to hold, and Bayless was allowing it. The commentators were going crazy. Al Bernstein, it seemed like he was probably ready to jump in that ring and rip into Kenny Bayless. So if you don't know, right, with holding, we've seen fights where I'm blanking on the fight. I believe it was on the undercard of the Brandon Figueroa fight early in March, where one of the refs actually took away a point for a fighter for holding so much, because that was all he was doing, right? He was only in there to hold. But Kenny Bayless, that's not him. He's not going to do that. If you remember watching some of the Floyd Mayweather's fights, he did a lot of clinching, holding. That was a tactic. Kenny Bayless officiated a lot of those fights. Goes in perfectly with what Floyd was trying to do. So I had heard a couple people say this. One person on Twitter, I forget his name, and then on YouTube, someone was reacting to the fight, and I think this is just kind of. I like this analogy. They said every boxing referees, officials, just like baseball officials, they have their own strike zone. They have something that they allow and something they don't allow. And Kenny Bayless allows clinching. I will say when he does clinch, he was in there fast. He was in there fast to get him out and break up their clinch. But in the first half of the fight, that was what was bothering Benavidez. He wasn't able to get out of those clinches. He wasn't able to fight out of those clinches, right? And Plant was like, oh, okay, I'm going to take what I can get. And the entire fight, and he didn't get a warning, he didn't get a point taken off, because it was allowed. So it just happened that Benavidez learned, adapted, and was like, okay, if he's gonna clinch, I'm gonna fight on the inside. I'm not gonna let him clinch, hold me. I'm not, hold me, and I'm not able to punch. Benavidez is like, all right, you want to come inside? Now I'm gonna hit you with some uppercuts. I'm gonna hit you with a left hand when you come on the inside to try and clinch, because I can't let you just take 2 minutes out the round running and then clinching, and then you're just stealing the rounds. So I thought that if anything came out of this fight, I thought Benavidez's IQ and his corner's IQ to be like, you got to fight on the inside, because towards the end of the fight there was times where Kenny Bayless was coming in to tap him to break him up, and Benavidez fought out the clinch. At the beginning of the fight he wasn't doing that. Once he figured, okay, I got to do this or else I'm gonna lose these rounds, he was able to do it and do it successfully and dominate. I thought Plant was going down and was out of it in the 8th round. It was the 8th round. He sustained a cut on an accidental headbutt, and then Benavidez was knocking him with these punches. Clinched, gets separated. It looked like, okay, this is going to be, Benavidez is going to finish the show right here. And then Kenny Bayless actually took a time out of the fight and brought Plant to the corner to make sure the doctor checked on him. And there was only like 40 seconds left in the round, so Plant was able to get his second wind and stay in the round, and then evidently actually stay up the entire fight, which I thought was huge, because it just shows that, Plant does have that kind of dog in him. I'm not going out, right? I'm not going to be lying on that canvas. I'm going to fight this entire fight. So I thought that was good for Plant. Just his fatigue, man, his endurance. I don't know. I don't know if that's something you can work on, or what he has, right? But played a factor in the Canelo fight, and now played a factor in the Benavidez fight. Hey, man, he's lost both of them. So, overall, I think Plant will take his time, regroup, and he'll fight an elite fighter at 168, because there's no shortage of them. Morel, if Charlo moves up, on Boo Andrade, it's not only Benavidez and Canelo. So I think Plant, he still has some good fights in him, some solid 168 fights in him, but now becomes the question is, hey man, he's a good fighter, but can he get past those top guys of the division, or is he just one tier below those guys? So that was kind of my takeaway for Plant. Benavidez, it was his night. He showed he has power. He showed he has defense, right? Because if you look at Plant's face, obviously there's a cut from the headbutt. His face looks awful compared to Benavidez, who, it looks like he just went for a run or something. It looked like he had a couple bruises on his forehead, but that's boxing. He didn't have all that much. So props to him. And then props to the both of them for burying the beef between them between them. In my preview, I did a whole segment, on the beef between these two dating back 5 years. They both got in the ring after the fight, congratulated each other, and had nothing but respectful words for each other, saying it's over. So much respect for them for doing that. I'd heard something that was kind of crazy and kind of petty, but Caleb Plant had wanted Benavidez not to be allowed to have braids for the fight, right? Because he and his team said, he's going to have oils in his hair, it's going to cause an advantage or something. And Benavidez's team came back and said, okay, we won't have braids, but you got to shave your beard. And so they agreed both to allow what they have. I just thought that was funny. I never heard about that before. Just kind of the pettiness between each other, between the two of them. But after the fight, they settled everything in the ring, and you love to see it. Even Jim Gray was asking him about Benavidez about some stuff, and Benavidez said, hey, I'm not going to answer that because I have nothing bad to say about him. I'm only going to say respect because there's no reason to keep this beef up anymore. We settled it like men, and you got to commend both of them for doing that. Give each other the most props for that. So, what's next, right, for Benavidez? It's got to be Canelo. Canelo's the undisputed 168. Man, would that be one heck of a fight. Canelo fights in May against John Ryder, and then usually fights in September. I know Benavidez was calling, hey, let's fight in September. Man, would that be one heck of a fight in the second half of this year if that fight can be made. We know Canelo wants Bivol again after he suffered that defeat a year ago. But if Benavidez and Canelo has to happen at some point, right? And it's kind of now in Canelo's court. The ball's in his court because Benavidez has been calling him out for a while. And there's no excuse now. It's not like, oh, these little guys got to fight someone before they fight me. Hey, David fought someone. Now it's his turn to fight you. Man, I think that could be an absolutely awesome fight. Way too early to try and predict it. Way too many things. But trust me, that would be an incredible fight. That was the main event. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I needed to say about this. Just respect to Caleb Plant for, going to 12. And then just David Benavidez, man. He proved that even those slow rounds at the start of the fight, that wasn't going to deter him. He was going to turn up eventually and do what he needed to do to get this win. And, I think in that 8th round, if Kenny Bayless doesn't step in, I think Plant's night is over early in that 8th round. But we'll never know. And the two have respect for each other. So that's the best thing that could have come out from this fight. Looking forward to seeing both of their next fights, especially if Benavidez can get that Canelo fight signed, and then Plant. I like Plant, man. It'll be fun to see what the future has installed for them and the 168 division total. Jamal Charlo was talking all throughout fight week because he was there, talking about moving up to 168. So Charlo going to that division, that would be a nice, really good division in the sport of boxing. What a night for boxing. We're wrapping this up. That's all I gotta say. Sold out MGM Grand Arena. I think the pay-per-view is going to do very well. This was one of those nights where it's like, all right, man, boxing can really be one of those sports again. You have the best fighting the best. Boxing can really do this consistently. Shout out to all the Mexican fight fans that were rocking with David Benavidez. You could hear it through the TV, their support. It was incredible. Fights like this are what make boxing one of the best sports in the world. So just got to give props up to both Benavidez and Plant taking this fight, battling in this fight, and providing, boxing with a great night. All throughout the undercard to the main event. It was a great night of boxing, and hey man, I'm looking forward to what we have coming up. Shakur fights in 2 weeks. Tank fights 2 weeks after that. Got some May fight. Stanionis, Ortiz fight after that. I was disappointed to see Fulton anyway get postponed, but that's postponed, not canceled. So I'm really excited for that fight. Talks on the horizon about Spence and Crawford in June. We've fallen into this trap before, so I'm not, saying anything, but that would be something. I'm not getting my hopes up too much for that fight. But overall, boxing won a Saturday night, and incredible to see, incredible to watch. I appreciate you guys tuning in for, if you listen to my preview of the fight, you're listening now for my recap. I appreciate you. Again, if you're listening on streaming services, I'd appreciate if you gave me a follow on the streaming services. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, whatever you're listening to on there, just so you're always up to date what's coming next. YouTube, if you want to subscribe, like, comment, anything on the video helps me out. Be happy to talk boxing, anyone who comments, and I'm telling you, content's coming. Content is coming to that platform, YouTube. Again, I appreciate everyone listening in. What a night for boxing. One of the nights we're going to look back and say, all right, this is when David Benavidez became a star in the sport of boxing. that's my recap of it. Appreciate you listening. I'm out. Peace.